Very good evening to everybody who has joined us here today. I'm Oshika Ghosh, a part of the Startup India team. Welcome to today's session of the Rise Up series, Building from Bricks. Our session today focuses on startups disrupting the deep tech ecosystem and India as the technology hub. The Rise Up series is an initiative as part of the National Startup Awards 2022. Through this series, we host stalwarts and experts across sectors, industries, and domains to deliberate and discuss the key trends in the Indian startup ecosystem in context of these specific sectors. The National Startup Awards is an annual flagship initiative under the Department of Promotion for Industry and Internal Trade as part of the Startup India initiative. The applications for the 2022 edition of the awards is open for till 15th April 2022. And today we have with us Dr. Hemang Shah, who is the India Engineering Lead at Qualcomm. Dr. Hemang works with startups in India to design products that leverage artificial intelligence and compute on the edge. He works on intellectual property strategy by maximizing inventions that are generated through engineering projects. As an innovation and tech transfer evangelist, he frequently engages with the ecosystem participants that include startups, academia, and the industry at large. Welcome, Dr. Hemang. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks, Mandoshika, and the entire Startup India team. I mean, you guys have been major stalwarts for the growth of startups in the country. So kudos to you, the team, and I guess advance wishes for the National Startup Awards. Really waiting to see what that cohort looks like.
Thank you so much, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. And with that, we'll be starting with our session. So, Dr. Hemang, my first question to you is that in India, the number of technology startups have more or less been on the higher side as compared to other non tech based startups, especially if we see the trends in the last 15 years or so. But having said that, the spike in deep tech startups has been quite recent. So, how do you now see the future of the deep tech industry in India with respect to the startup boom?
Uh, Ushika, it's a very encouraging future, and I speak from like first-hand data. Like we have, in terms of startup incubation and mentorship, we have two programs. One where we work with startups that are, making IoT hardware products. Essentially, they're making products which require compute on the edge and which require mobile connectivity. And we also separately have a women entrepreneurship program, like to mentor women-founded startups in the deep tech category. Now, over the years, we have seen startups build products which are addressing use cases in smart water sensing, space tech, drones, robotics, med tech, e-bikes. I mean, I can go on and on. The beauty is that these startups initially, like say if I look at the kind of problems they were solving about 5 years ago to what they're doing now, is that they're getting deeper and deeper into what they can do on the device itself. They are making progress on their AI algorithms. They are inventing things, and there are two main factors at play here. So I firstly believe that the talent was always there in the country. So it was never a shortage on that front. But the couple of things which changed was one, from a startup's perspective, it's a design mindset which has come, that we now are designing products in India, we are inventing in India. So it's more of a product mindset that we are seeing from startups. And the other factor is that it's a very supportive ecosystem, and this includes government, industry, academia, and of course the startups themselves. So it's a very thriving ecosystem. So for deep tech, yeah, I say it's a very exciting time to be in India.
Thank you for answering that. So, yeah, the future for the deep tech industry does look pretty promising. That brings me to my next question. So, we see that the major players in the deep tech industry are more often than not based out of metropolitan cities like Bangalore, Mumbai, Hyderabad. But what are some of the ways in which the prospect for tier 2 and tier 3 cities can be improved in this regard?
So when we scout for startups, we have received applications from across the country. So in that sense, it's always been a healthy trend of applications, not just from the metro cities, but like even in the tier two and the tier three places. The last 2 years actually have been very difficult because of COVID that impacted everyone. Let's say certainly at the personal level, if not at the professional. But if I can say one of the things it has led to is the remote support for startups in deep tech has even increased. So, for example, in if I look at the way we were supporting our programs, let's say startups had to visit our site in Bangalore at least for the onboarding, and then there's a continual visit required. Because of the constraints that COVID placed on us, we went to a full remote model and full remote for a hardware IoT product company, meaning the startups were getting kits wherever they are based, wherever their team is based, they are developing on the fly. So in that sense, tier two, tier three cities can really take advantage of things being very accessible on a remote basis. It has also led to a lot of the tools that were supposedly available only in person. Now they are available wherever you are. You can have remote access to those things. So I think the assumptions around that physical proximity don't hold as much weight today. Even the talent, right? Nowadays you have people who want to be wherever they are based, like whether it's a tier three town and they just want to live there. Now they are finding like-minded people over there. So in terms of an overall, I guess, a mindset, you can make things happen wherever you are based.
Agreed, and I really hope that we get to see more such remote initiatives by different stakeholders because, as you said, this is one key way through which startups based out of anywhere can actually leverage the support. So, thanks for that. And moving on to the next question. So, when we talk about deep tech, so deep tech is a pretty broad term that's used for a group of sectors that
Yeah.
within themselves are very specific. So, are there any major trends that you see in subsectors and categories under deep tech? And this is specifically for robotics, blockchain, and artificial intelligence.
So I think these sectors, again, looking at first-hand data, uh, are showing like a very encouraging trend, certainly in the robotics space. So we've always had startups that have been working with us in the drones and the robotics area as such. Now the use cases that they are building are now going at a deeper level. So we have startups that are addressing problems, let's say in the underwater drone space. There's someone who's doing industry floor cleaning robots, which are fully automated, like they have autonomous navigation. We have someone who's making like these robotic balls, for defense based applications, for like a surveillance kind of a use case. Now as they are building these things, they are going to get a lot deeper into what kind of problems they are solving on the device itself. Like, so all the things like object detection, about how to find your path to as they navigate, in these areas, or whether it's for delivery of, let's say, a particular medicine in a hospital use case from one end of the hospital floor to another. I think that requires a lot of deep tech expertise, certainly on the algorithm side. I think the other factor which will also come into play is as we see 5G enter the country, you'll see a lot of the advantages it brings. And that's not just in high speed throughput that you might have, let's say, for a drone, which is imaging at a high resolution and then sending the data. But even, let's say, for a factory floor kind of a use case where it's taking, let's say, delivering screws from one part of the warehouse to another, you can't have an accuracy in the meters range, right? But 5G allows you much more a finer resolution of accuracy. So you'll see those kind of applications also appear. Uh, I think you also mentioned blockchain. While I'll admit that I don't know way too much about these things, but yesterday I was having a conversation with a startup that wants to use IoT for blockchain for a variety of things. One is to make it more sustainable because currently a lot of these computes are happening on platforms which consume a lot of energy, but also there is a fair amount of latency involved. So if they do it on the edge, they are exploring whether that can help them address these challenges. and they can also bring in a lot of the elements of hardware security. So it's going to be an interesting space to watch out. Uh, yeah, we firsthand, as I said, drones, robotics, really exciting areas. Everyone's using AI. You can't escape it. You have to keep evolving. And I think blockchain has a lot of interesting applications, and will be fun to see what takes off.
Yes, I think blockchain is one particular area where even 5 years from now we'll see a lot of startups still bringing out the new insights and bringing out the new inventions because there's just a lot to uncover from there.
True.
So moving on to our next question, which is again specific to tech startups. So when we talk about tech startups, commercialization is of a lot of importance to them. In your experience, and since you have a lot of experience with startups working towards patenting and IPR, what are some key points that all aspiring and existing entrepreneurs should know about? And this is with respect to going through a process in general or while doing a very specific step like filing for intellectual property rights. So, what are some key things that startups should keep in mind while going through this process of commercialization?
That's a great question, Oshika. I think let's take a step back and see what leads to a startup being formed. Usually, it is someone who is unhappy with how a particular problem is being solved today, and they see a gap. They're like, "Hey, our product, our way can lead to, let's say, a 10x improvement in how that product functions, in the user experience, and so on." So the start is with the premise of an innovation. They are bound to happen. And that's an edge. And that's the edge which every startup must strive really hard to protect and maximize. And intellectual property, at least in the tech sector, becomes a very, I would say, it's a very obvious way of protecting that, because it should be a part of your business strategy. What startups sometimes fail to look at, and it's very natural to think of IP as a cost function, right? Because you're paying for, let's say, filing, you're paying for say firms which are doing, let's say, the drafting of patents, all that. So it's easy to look at it as a cost, but in the truest sense, they are creating assets. That portfolio of intellectual property can be put to much better use. So, for example, in terms of commercialization, startups can do cross collaboration with someone else who's in that space, cross collaborate, gain access to each other's IP, and make their products better. They can also, for example, startups may pivot. They may explore a different vertical. So the IP that they have created, they could transfer it to someone who can make it better. Number of times we've seen startups in India, as they're scaling up, they have ambitions of expanding globally. And in the deep tech space, if you're solving an Indian problem, very likely someone else in the world is also experiencing it.
Yes.
Now, they can partner with companies in all those respective countries, have a global portfolio, and again, either in terms of commercializing that IP, or even sometimes through sale of IP assets. Those are many ways through which IP can be commercialized. But it starts by being, IP aware. Make it a part of your business strategy.
Thank you, Hemang. I hope all our startups, have taken note of these things. Moving on, so since our shared objective is, of course, to support as many startups as well as possible, what are some ways in which all the stakeholders in the startup ecosystem, including corporates, incubators, accelerators, and of course the government, can come together to basically create an environment that nurtures the growth of more and more deep tech startups in India?
So I think it starts by it's you need both sides to complete the picture, right? And from a startup's perspective, I think be very cognizant about what is it that you're building, meaning what are your strengths, and what are the things that you need. Right? So a startup might say that, hey, I'm exploring a very new use case. I'm charting a product on a market which does not exist yet, but it will be relevant say 2 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever the case may be. So startup is bringing that to the table, a very fresh perspective. But what it often lacks, that's one of the gaps that they need to be aware about. And it's not just funding. Let's say it might be a deep tech problem where they're like, we need technical mentorship, we need guidance. So they want to do things, let's say on the edge, they're like, we need ways to make it happen on different devices. What are the form factors? And it's not just that you create a prototype, you got to have a mindset of how do I get into production. So those things need to be identified from the startup side, that what do they have and what help do they need. And from once they start with this particular, I guess, baseline, then they can look at, okay, what is the ecosystem offering me? And the ecosystem is offering various ways. So there are programs, and largely speaking, what happens across the Indian industry landscape, at least, there are mentorship programs which may take a startup from 0 to 1. There are programs which expose the startups to, let's say, new platforms on which they can build. Then there are incubators. For example, the program that we run, where we take a startup in a select vertical as such, and take them towards the path from zero to a pilot. Then there are accelerator programs which say largely focus on either accelerating on the technical front or exposing them to through paid POCs or to other industry connects. And then of course you have the larger thing of getting more funding and so on. But the industry is offering you all these things, and many times startups apply to each and every one of those. But I would say probably take a more honest look at what you bring to the table, where exactly you need the help for, let's say now, complete that stage and then move on. So go on this upward cycle instead of addressing everything at once. Be methodical in that approach.
So, Hemang, as you just said, that the industry is offering a lot of opportunities to startups, and startups need to explore them and again be methodical about what they want to finally apply to. Here, I think we see that corporates are also playing an extremely crucial role in the entire innovation and tech ecosystem, and Qualcomm is a good example of that. So, in your opinion, how can deeper engagement models be created between more corporates and startups in a way that it mutually benefits them both?
Sure. A lot of this is already happening nowadays, and that's why I call it a thriving ecosystem right now. So, for example, we have these WhatsApp groups of corporate accelerators and the ecosystem, where if a startup needs particular help, as corporate incubators or accelerators, we are willing to help each other out. Number of these programs. So I can say for our program, that is equity free, meaning if a startup is a part of our program and they want resources that someone else can provide, we are very happy to work with them. We are very happy to introduce them to whatever those respective connects might be. Sometimes the startups need detailed technical expertise, and those again, what we can provide ourselves within, let's say the ambit of our programs, we could, and we surely do that. But even outside, like as a startup might be exploring a new country, so it helps to take the startup to those particular events. So it might be, let's say, smart cities expo which is happening in Taiwan, and that their use case might find more customers there. And so you introduce them not just to their direct customers, but even to other corporates in those countries. So I think I'll probably repeat what I shared earlier. I think it helps being very cognizant about what a startup strengths are, and again from the corporate side, what are their offerings, and what is it that let's say their partners or their broader network can connect. Like for example, the Startup India team has done a fabulous job of creating all these resources, on the website. It's such an easy way for a startup to search that, hey, what are the incentives I can avail of. Let's say if I'm filing for a patent in this particular area, which state can reimburse me what, where can I find patent trademark facilitators. So as corporates, one of our duties is to make sure that this information gets to startups, because we solve their problem. I guess the advantage corporates bring is we sort of have more of a mature process or a methodical approach. Startups have that pace, that agility, and I think there's a happy coexistence where one can help the other.
Absolutely. And I think information dissemination, it's something that all stakeholders should be coming together and, helping each other out to ensure that the startups know about all opportunities. Coming to the next question. So I would like to know that in your career till now, what have been the three of your biggest learnings from working at the intersection between technology and startups?
Uh, that's a good question. There have been many learnings. I would say some principles are universal. That a systems mindset is going to be helpful to you whether you work for a tech firm or whether you work for a startup. Having this end-to-end perspective, a systems mindset, is really critical. Think one area which has played a very important role in my life is an awareness and exposure to innovation, and how to really understand what technical edge, how you bring about differentiations, and if you do, you have to work very hard towards protecting that. I think that would be the second learning. And again, you're a universal principle which applies to everything in tech, and certainly having seen startups is that a team is always far stronger than an individual. Like individual energy can take you somewhere. I mean, I just saw this movie 83 the other day, and you can see how, if you look at that movie, how Kapil Dev is so passionate about winning from the get-go, but no one believed in him. But as much as his passion and belief was there, even he could not do it alone. Ultimately, the team had to come together and pull through for that win. Same thing applies for startups. You need everyone playing in different roles, sometimes more than what they are tasked, for as such. So yeah, those three things are systems mindset, be IP aware, innovation aware, and team much stronger than the individual.
Thank you for summarizing that. And you, in your professional as well as personal capacity, you continue to closely mentor startups, and you obviously have spent a lot of time with a lot of diverse startups. So, in your experience, what are some of the overall common challenges that you've observed that startups face, especially the early stage startups? And what is your advice usually for these startups to navigate through these challenges?
It's a very pertinent question, and I think a trap that a number of startups or founders get into are that they are over confident about some of the strengths that they have. Uh, and so let's say if it's a hardware company, I've heard things in the past where someone who's a strong hardware engineer says that oh, software is easy, and when they actually get to that part, in creating the software, things tend to fall apart. So I would say, firstly, be brutally honest about your strengths. As a company, what are the strengths of each founders? What are the areas where you need help, and be willing to ask for it. Be open in asking for that. I think the other thing which sometimes helps is that the initial journey might be good, but as they start putting the pieces together, from the prototype to the pilot, that's where a lot of the startups fall down the curve. And a way to help that is by creating these system flows. Figure out how things are supposed to work, firstly from a product perspective, then understand things from a user's part. That for a tech product, the tech is of course a key component of that, but ultimately it's solving a problem. Uh, and the problem is faced by your customer, whether they are individuals or businesses. So how does your product fit into that? Sometimes startups don't have that picture completely laid out, and the ones who have a very clear approach towards that, they tend to win far more. So I think get better at creating these flows. And of course, as you keep doing that, you'll figure out there are gaps, and those gaps could be talent gaps. Those gaps could be, access to tools. And but the beauty is, once you've identified that, that's a problem which has been laid out. And if you as the saying goes, right, once you define a problem, it is half solved. So get to those things, but yeah, be brutally honest about your strengths.
Agreed. So having an open mind is necessary when it comes to these areas which you said, which may be a startup strong suit, and other areas which may not be their strong suits, but they may require some help there. So it's best to recognize them early on. Finally, there's this last question from our end, that there's a large scope for social impact through deep tech solutions, and we've already seen multiple initiatives around the world as well. Some of these are AI for good and robotics in healthcare. But there are some problem statements that are extremely specific to India and the way the systems in India work. So, how can we here leverage deep tech to create solutions for these problem statements in India?
Again, I think the fun part about my role is to look at startups who are creating very impactful solutions. Like one of the winners of our last year's challenge, they are solving a problem in the area of smart water sensing and also sewage monitoring. So they're going to create these smart sewage where they'll analyze different parameters through a variety of techniques, through different sensors, and possibly expanding the scope through vision, all that. So it's as deep tech as it could be. The challenge is, deploying it across the country in varying domains, and happy to share that they're making fabulous traction. So that combined with say the technical and the other infrastructure developments in the country, I think we'll see a number of these solutions that will be deployed for the good. And I think the roadmap is going to be, you know, again, I look forward to that. We have startups that have made amazing traction in the area of medical technologies. Like, their strengths might be on the AI side of things, and they're like, okay, how do I help, shorten the time of wound diagnosis from a few days to, let's say, within an hour, from an end to end, from a patient's perspective. How can they minimize that pain for the patient and also for the doctor? So it's a nice ecosystem which we have, because we have, as a country, we have an appetite for exploring these new solutions that the startups are offering. People are also willing to try it out, and it's not just the tech savvy folks. It is the everyday folks who are saying that, hey, this is a good tech, and if it can get them further ahead, they are willing to try it out. And even if it requires them paying a premium, they see the ROI and they go for that. So I think overall, a very exciting time, no matter what kind of problem you're solving, but certainly AI for good, wireless for good, robotics, healthcare. I think good times ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And thank you for highlighting the kind of solutions that startups are coming up with. It's really, really interesting and innovative. So, Hemang, now we will be looking at a couple of questions that have been shared with us by the audience. So, there's one question that's asking us, how should I ensure and validate that my startup is innovative enough for a patent?
Okay. So let me split that question into two parts. A startup is a company, right? So uh, where I think the question that you're asking is, how do I validate if my product is innovative or not? I would say, firstly, look at what is the product doing today that is different from what exists in the industry. Uh, like if it's a consumer-facing product, you can take a look at how other products in that space are solving the same problem, and what are the technical differentiation you're bringing to the table. These differences are normally classified as features, right? That I have certain features which are not offered by the competition today. So that should be your first starting point. And then with regards to whether it's suitable for patent, now a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, so please don't treat this as legal advice. I would ask you to Like spell that feature down into, let's say, a flowchart or a block diagram. So if you had to implement it, how would you do it today? Once you get it to that level, I would probably say, the if you're not IP savvy, work with say a patent agent or a patent counsel who can guide you on the next steps. I'll also plug in a product that that we have launched. Like, it's an IP e-learning program called L2 Pro, completely free to use. It's actually hosted on the Startup India homepage. So if you look at the IPR courses at the Startup India education section, you will see L2 Pro as a course there, completely free to use. So you can learn how this is done by yourself. Right? So that's how I would gather, Moshika.
Thank you for answering that, Hemang. Hope that answers the question. We have another question. The saying that they're a technology startup founder and they're asking whether how to decide the stage at which they should raise funds for their startup, and if there is anything that they should keep in mind while showcasing their tech solution to the investors.
It's a great question. Again, two broad parts, right? One is the funding part, and the other is what should they keep in mind. I think for funding, look at very honestly at what scale you are, and firstly, do you need funds from the get go itself or not? A lot of times you can get to like a prototype without the need for raising funds, and once you have that, for your scale up plans, I would say create a create a roadmap for where you want to go. Like, if you're let's say going to launch a number of devices, right? Where are you going to launch them? How are you going to target the customers? What is required in order for you to create that product in the first place? So as much as you can reverse engineer that process, get that template. And once you do that, you will know at each stage what all do you need. It's not just funding, because funding is an enabler in my opinion, but you will also likely need other team members to join you for those different stages in your journey. The second question is what you should keep in mind. Now, startups are going to present, their plans, their vision at a variety of places. It might be competitions, it might be at, say, VC type of meetings, and so on. Always keep in mind that these tend to be very public events, meaning you don't have any non-disclosure agreements signed with people who are attending. You should always go with that assumption. A safe practice is whatever technical differentiation you are bringing to the table, I would say at least file provisional patents on that before you spill your beans in the public. Do not do that in the first place, but if you come to a point where you have to share some secrets, make sure that you have filed for provisional patents. Right, so that's the number one step. And let's say if someone does keep pushing you to divulge those details, uh, be very confident in saying that it is something which you are going to safeguard. It is your intellectual property, and until the time is right, you will take the call on when to talk more about it or not.
Thank you, Hemang, for answering that. We'll take one more question. It has come from Mr. Dinesh L. He's asking about how to solve electronic waste in India, which is a growing problem through deep tech. So, if you have any suggestions or inputs on that.
So electronic waste, again, we are all part to blame for that, right? We all use number of devices, and a number of them, I guess, go out of town. I don't want to give a ready solution, but I would say approach the problem from a system mindset, right? Why don't you create a system level diagram which let's say starts from the users, individuals to corporates and all that, where all are the opportunities to address electronic waste. Because if you try to address it, let's say for a billion plus people, that can be a very daunting problem to solve. So maybe narrow it down to, let's say, one or two different categories, where you're like, okay, what can I learn about this particular segment of customers? How are they generating the waste? How is that waste being handled today? There are lots of e-waste collection drives which happen at different levels. Let's say at certain companies or tech parks, those are naturally happening. some of those happen at the individual level depending on where you live also. So I would say probably identify those and figure out the pieces which are working well and the areas which need improvement. I think tech is going to be a major enabler, right? As you track, for example, the waste as it moves from the origin to how it is, I guess, properly, I don't know what the right term is, but how it is properly, uh, degraded, like biodegraded or discarded, right? So we don't want to dispose it of just in, say, a landfill, but how do we make it meaningful such that the environment is left in a much better place. It's going to be a very interesting area with the entire move towards ESG. So, Mr. Dinesh, if you're thinking on this, yeah, kudos to you. I think the scope is amazing.
Thank you, Hemang. I think that answered Mr. Dinesh's question. And thank you so much for answering all our questions, in fact, and for giving us some absolutely great insights about all things tech and startups. It's always a pleasure interacting with you, and I'm sure that all startups and other stakeholders in the ecosystem who had joined us here today have had quite a few important takeaways. And with that, we've come to the end of our session today. Before signing off, we'd just like to remind everyone tuned in that applications for the National Startup Awards 2022 are open till 15th April 2022. And this is an opportunity for all startups, incubators, and accelerators to apply, get national recognition, cash awards, and dedicated handholding. Thank you so much, Hemang. It was a pleasure having you today here.
Thanks much, Oshika, and thank you, for these wonderful set of questions. They are very pertinent, and I hope startups you are listening. I hope the input helps you, and please do apply to the National Startup Awards. 1 week left.
Yes. Thank you so much, Hemang.
Okay, thank you. See you all.